Yeah, I've connected in for the past year with Union City and with kind of Ashes to Ruby's LifeLab community. And um, it's been interesting for me because I'd say I don't um, at least have what would be traditionally understood as an addiction. But there's a lot of stuff in my heart that God needs to work through and has worked through and is working through and is revealing. Um, And so, yeah, it's been a very interesting journey for me, and in some ways, learning new things, and in some ways, new vocabulary for things I'd already learned. But um, I'd say for me, faith is a pretty integral part of my journey, and specifically following Jesus. And so, yeah, in high school, that started for me, and I'd say something real took root at that point in high school, and it's something I've carried ever since. But I'd say I've also carried some old habits, some old motivations, some old fears with me into this journey of life and journey of faith. And even in the midst of having done some pretty deep inner healing, there's just still more throughout that. And so it's been interesting to look back and realize that right in the midst of all the good and the genuine and sincere, there's been a lot of unhealthy, there's been a lot of twistedness that I can very much be a perfectionist. I have an image I put forward, and a lot of that is based on fear. A lot of that is based on trying to get something out of people. And I think those were tendencies in some ways I always carried with me, but very much imported that into my faith and into my following of Jesus. And so some of those things, like I said, perfectionism, gaining the approval of others by being good. So kind of using goodness as a tactic to try to get people to cheer me on or like me or look up to me. Lots of fears of being a failure, of being judged, being messy. And so maybe this is partly personality and partly my brokenness combined, but pretty early in my journey of faith, I became very disciplined and very intentional. So I did a lot of spiritual disciplines. I tried to know Jesus and help others know him. And that was very much, yeah, my view of self was entirely wrapped up in that. And some of that, like I said, very genuine and healthy space, but some of that was very deeply rooted in fear and insecurity. And in some ways, I realized this at the time, and in some way, in moments, and in some ways, I'm realizing it looking back. But I think I used my faith as a tactic to let me think I was better than other people. So it was a way that I used um, that instead of it ultimately being about a relationship with me and God, it was ultimately for me at some level it was about me being better than other people, and God was kind of a tool I used to be able to look down on others. Sometimes I used my faith or my that journey as a set of rules I could follow, as a game I could play, and I could know the rules and I could win the game, win the respect of my community. Or I used faith as a way and discipline and hard work as a way to convince God I was worthy of his blessing. And so that's something I've carried with me. And then after university, I ended up working in a Christian organization for 8 years, and a nonprofit, sort of helping university students grow in their faith. And lots of good things about that, and lots of bad things about that. And there's elements of real genuineness and sincerity, and then a lot of elements of self-serving and yeah, hustling for my identity, I think. And every once in a while over those 8 years, I'd say I hit a bit of a wall. And then this past summer in July 2022, I hit a wall that felt bigger and heavier and harder to surmount, that I was just exhausted. And I think a lot of that was tied to these bad motivations for what I think were good things. So a lot of, especially would be seen as good within a Christian context, but even outside of Christian context, whether that was like um, coming alongside people who are struggling with their mental health, whether that was um, caring about people who are on the margins financially, all these things that are, I think are good, and yet so much of that was done out of fear, I think, and done out of trying to prove myself, trying to get something out of people. Um, I have one friend in particular who he I was coming to terms with realizing that I was really using him actually, because he was someone who was very hard to love. And so I kind of made it part of my identity that I was Bruce, the ultra patient person who would love even that annoying person. And he just didn't give me what I wanted. Usually you help someone and you get gratitude and you get some kickback, but he didn't give me kickback. And so I started to realize that, oh, I'm really angry at him because he's not giving me this kickback that I'm looking for. So maybe it's about my kickback, and maybe it's not actually a genuineness of love and compassion. And I think all things are mixed together, that there were certainly moments of genuineness in my relationship with him, but also ways that it wasn't. And I think that led me to a place of exhaustion. And so I don't know whether I was burnt out or simply on the road towards burnout, but either way, I knew I needed to change. Um, Kind of in hindsight, with using some new vocabulary, I was living a lot in the have to of things I had to do, things I felt pressure to do, things I felt I was obligated to do, either because God obligated me, or because my organization obligated me, or because um, to think I was a good person, I was obligated to do these things, and really not living out of the get to, really not seeing the privilege actually of doing what is right and good. And so I was exhausted, and I sort of ran out of willpower to force myself to do the have tos. Like I just couldn't do the have tos anymore. Um, that was just the wall, the lack of energy that I hit. And I think coinciding with that was discovering there was an unhealthy blurring of lines in my life, an unhealthy blurring of lines between my faith and my work, because I was working for a Christian organization. And I think I was unable to really distinguish between my identity as a child of God and my identity as a professional Christian worker. And they were both kind of enmeshed in an unhealthy way. So was I praying because it was my job to pray? Was I loving other people because it was my job? And ultimately, would my faith stand on its own without the external expectation of this job? So I realized I need to leave the organization, and that was a surprise to many people, and in some ways a surprise to myself. But it sort of felt like it was this or continue on a road that was going to go off a cliff in some ways. And in that time, I really needed to redecide, in some ways for the first time in 8 years, if I actually believed in God, if I actually wanted to follow him. Was my experience of faith real? Was it dependable for the future? Or was it all explainable by coincidence and confirmation bias? Um, and I think ultimately, I just didn't have the energy to force myself anymore, to force myself to do things that I thought I was supposed to. And so I gave myself permission to stop trying. Uh, and I stopped doing kind of all the good things, so to speak, or all these disciplines, all this intentional effort that I'd been applying, all these things I'd been insisting to university students that they should do these things, and realized, oh no, I actually can't do these things. So I stopped checking a lot of the boxes, so to speak. I stopped jumping through a lot of the hoops. So whether that was whether that was serving other people, whether that was Sabbathing, whether that was praying or reading the Bible, or whether that was avoiding escapism, whether that was just wrestling my mind to try to think the right things. I just kind of gave myself permission to stop all of that. I kept going to church, which was partly an attempt to give God something to work with, but it was also largely just because I was lonely and wanted friends. And I kept up a gratitude journal, and again, that was partly because I knew scientifically this is good for my mental health, whether or not a God exists or not. And now it might seem odd, but for me, that cutting back, uh, I think was the only act of faith I was capable of. So it was me banking on the fact that if God exists, if he is who he says he is, then he can handle the weight of this season, that he's going to keep on holding on to me, even if I'm not able to hold on to him. So I'd spent so many years doing, in my mind, the right things for a mix of reasons, and some of them motivations being very unhealthy. And I felt like I now needed, in some ways, to detox. Like in some ways, I needed to get it out of my system, of just get some separation between me and this intentionality and um, this self effort in many ways. Because yeah, there's a rigidity to my faith, rigidity to my life, and a heaviness. And I'll say it was quite a scary couple months. Felt quite dark. In some ways, I felt like I was on the edge of an abyss, and in some ways, I felt like I was the abyss. That I was just kind of this emptiness that was kind of seeking to gobble anything up. And I'm not really able to explain it, both because I don't fully understand and for the sake of time, but somehow I feel like I've emerged out of that, and God has pulled me out of that. And he didn't really answer my doubts, and sometimes they circle back. If I'm honest, kind of this week they've been circling around particularly, but in a weird way, I think God has proved himself worthy of my trust, that he was able to hold on to me even after I stopped kind of doing the right things, checking off the boxes, even after I stopped holding on so fiercely to him. So I'd say my faith now has more room for mystery. I think it's less about me and my need to understand, my need to have mental control. I'd say I'm better at living day at a time. Um, but like I said, it's up and down, and some days it feels like nothing's changed, but some days it feels like everything's changed. And yeah, and to maybe narrow in a little bit on this idea of doing the right things for the wrong reasons, that I spent many years doing supposedly good things, things that both within the Christian world and just kind of the broader world that we live in, things that would be applauded by people, things that would make me look good, that made me feel good about myself. Um, and there was always a mix of emotions or motivations. There's always genuine and selfish, kind of right, all intertwined. So I think it is important to be honest with ourselves about why we do things, that the why really matters. Um, that, yeah, I think so much, it is so easy for me to get judgmental towards other people because my life is like relatively put together, because I haven't gone off on some crazy downward spiral of self-destruction. Um, but I think when I'm seeing things more clearly, I realize that even if the externals of my life are much more clean or put together, that the internals are often driven by pretty unhealthy things, and that I've felt with the crashing into the wall in some ways. I've felt the effects of that, of being motivated by fear, being motivated by self-righteousness. That humans are really good at deceiving themselves, that we deeply want to believe we are good people, and we are willing to do all sorts of mental gymnastics to protect that image. I think that is easy to accept in theory, but then it's hard to take the next step to say, I, Bruce, am one of these humans who is prone to mental gymnastics, who is prone to this self-justification. And so I think there is certainly a place for being self-critical and a place for being humble about why I'm doing things. I'd say there's also a tension here, though, and this is where I start to have fewer answers and more questions. But I think there's a tension here because throughout my experience, it's not that I wasn't aware of my bad motivations. It wasn't that I was completely ignorant of the unhealthy desires that were driving, the unhealthy fears that were driving my motivations and my actions. Because I actually was very aware at different times. I am prone to overthinking. I am prone to running my brain in circles, to psychoanalyzing myself, getting lost internally. Um, and I think that was actually a road of death as well. And that was one of the things I needed to, like in this period of just kind of letting go of everything, I needed to let go of that overthinking and that um, self-analysis, because I think that can also be driven by fear and brokenness. That trying really hard is not always a sign of maturity, even if it's for good things. And so, while yeah, for me, there's a tension there of like ignorance is actually pretty destructive if we're doing the right things for the wrong reasons and we're not sure why we're doing things. We're just kind of assuming, oh yes, I must be doing this for the right reason. I must be pure in heart. I must be genuinely loving and caring about other people. I don't think that's healthy. That's denial of reality, but at the same time, I think the opposite end of the spectrum is more where I fall in, and is more where I fall into both, I'd say. But um, yeah, I'm aware that I can easily fall into that over analysis, that kind of fear based self psychoanalyzing, um, and that ultimately is destructive too. And so I do think sometimes it is more mature to take a nap than to read the Bible or to um, do whatever thing we're supposed to do or think we're supposed to do. And I'm really grateful that I have had seasons of life where I felt a real permission just to enjoy God, where I felt permission just to receive. And I think that's done me really good. And the fruit of those seasons is hard to measure, and yet I think profound. That yeah, I have been felt free that I don't need to focus on others and rescue others and fix them. I don't need to worry too much about what I'm supposed to do. I just need to experience the reality that God said this is good when He looked at the world, and I'm grateful for those seasons. And again, this is where I have less answers and questions, but as I've been thinking through, like, how do we process when to really dive into this self-analysis of our motivations and when to just like live life and accept the risk that maybe we're making mistakes. Because I personally would love like a formula. I'd love a flow chart. I'd love something to really make them clear lines of like boom, 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 about when I should nap, when I should, um, stay up late helping at a soup kitchen or whatever it is, like when I should do what. Um, and I don't think God gives us that. I don't think that's something, I don't think we get a flow chart, or I haven't found one, at least that I can rely on. And I think that invites a sort of relationality, like that invites an interaction, an ongoing connection, a reliance and a trust, um, on God and on His Spirit. Um, that we can't really, it forces us to rely on the relationship rather than the list or the formula or the flow chart, that we can't weasel our way around it. Um, and I think it does invite us into a dependence on grace, that we will make mistakes, that as we work towards growth and recovery, that sometimes we're going to overcompensate in one direction and sometimes we're going to overcompensate in the other direction, um, and to be okay with that, that in both situations, um, that there is mercy in both places. Um, and I've needed mercy in both places. So yeah, I think there is a tendency in me, certainly with my sort of perfectionism, with maybe a bit of a messiah complex, with this need to feel like I'm the rescuer and I'm the fixer. That I think it's always easier for me to hear a voice of like, you should be doing more, or like you should die to yourself. I think there's truth to that, but I think it's also more complicated. Like I think there is, yeah, I think there's an ambiguity and a complication that um, that should lead me into a reliance on God and an interaction with Him about when to go and when to sit, when to lie down, and when to run. Um, and that is maybe a recent example of this kind of wrestling with motivations. Um, yeah, one example maybe is that recently I've been reflecting a little bit on curiosity and sort of asking people questions. I think is a really important part of friendships and relationships is asking each other questions, especially as you get to know people, but even beyond that. And I realized, I think part of what has motivated me to ask questions of people is A, because I think I'm supposed to. I think that's the right social thing to do. And so I'm checking that box. But it's also a tactic to gain friendship. Like it's me, I'm trying to get them to like me. And if I can get them talking about their favorite thing, of course they're gonna like me. If I can figure out that they really like violin and then get them talking about violining, well, wonderful. And now we're friends and now they think I'm awesome. Um, and and I don't think that's a good motivation. Like I think that's kind of unhealthy, even though it's a good thing. I think asking questions is good, and I think humans are worthy of curiosity. I think uh, people have been made in the image of God, and there is something mysterious and beautiful about each one, and there's something to be curious about. And so I've been practicing recently to try to be genuinely curious for their sake. Thank you, Vicky. Yeah, genuinely curious for their sake rather than for my own. And yeah, some days I think I overthink that and I get all like stiff and I don't ask questions because I'm like, oh, why am I why am I asking this question? What is my motivation? And it just feels really heavy and not life-giving. And then other days maybe I just go ahead and play the game and ask people questions because I'm being selfish and self-serving. And so yeah, I feel I'm sort of rambling here, but I think there's a real mystery to our journeys of life and recovery, and there's a uniqueness to everyone's story in that my journey where this period where I just kind of cut off every sort of intentionality to my faith and my recovery in some ways. um, I wouldn't recommend that for everyone in every season. But I do think there are things in our life that are beneficial to hold to structures and yeah, things that are worth grabbing onto. But for me, it was absolutely the right call. I think that was the only way of making the next step and walking into life. And so there is an ambiguity to all of this. And for me, what I sense is I think that's an invitation, not just to accept mystery in my life, but also to accept mystery in the lives of those around me, and to try to accept that their story is going to look different from mine, and that what they need might actually be death to me, and what I need might actually be death to them. And yeah, that these tools or these means of taking the next step, yeah, might be very different for each person. And to have a level of, yeah, grace and to be rooting for people and cheering people on and celebrating their journeys, just as I want them to celebrate my journey, uh, even, yeah, even if I don't understand. Um, so yeah, my hope is that that's making me um, less judgmental. My hope is that that's making me quicker to celebrate with others and slower to compare. My hope is that this is an ongoing transformation of living a day at a time, of accepting mystery, um, of doing things with a pure heart, doing things wholeheartedly, rather than being pulled in different ways by different motivations. Um, But yeah, I'll stop there. I think I've rambled enough, but hopefully there's something there to encourage, challenge, confuse you for the future.